Hey everybody, and welcome to Train Signal. And now that you have a pretty good understanding of what SQL Server installation is all about, it's time to work on a more advanced type of installation, and these are going to be the command line installations. Now, there's more than one way that you can install SQL Server. The command line, you can do it just with the command line switches, you can do it with a config file, and you can do it with a combination of both. The first thing we're going to talk about is using the command line switches, but I'm telling you, I'm not going to spend much time on this because up front, I don't like this method of install, and you're going to see why in a minute. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so to start teaching you command line installs, I thought I would bring you into BOL because I really wanted to kill two birds with one stone here. I want to show you all of the options that are available to you for a command line install, but I also wanted to show you how to look this stuff up on your own because that's really what's important, is learning how to look stuff up on your own. So if you remember from last time, BOL is Books Online, and that's SQL Server's documentation that we installed in the previous lesson. And consequently, we're going to install again here too, right? So you bring up BOL, and you just type in the search box in the top, install command line, and the second option should be install SQL Server 2012 from the command prompt. Now, there's lots of good advice in here. There really is. It tells you what all the parameters mean, what all the switches mean. It tells you, even gives you a little bit of advice every now and then on how to use them. It gives you the options that it expects. Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you is we enjoy a much richer install experience in SQL Server 2012 than we ever have before. Never before have we had every single option that is available in the GUI install available to us in the script as well. So anything you can do in the GUI, any choice you can make here, and you can have it fully scripted. So this is a really good time to be installing SQL Server, if you will. So I just want to show you around some of these things. The PID is just the product ID that you saw in the first couple screens of the GUI install. And you're going to notice some of these things that you've seen before, right? You're going to recognize some of these things. Features, the features parameter takes AS, RS, IS, and a bunch of others as well. But you'll remember these from that huge feature selection screen that we had in the previous lesson in the GUI. AS is analysis services. Remember, that's the main BI component. RS is reporting services, which is clearly their reporting server. And IS is integration services. Sometimes you'll hear it called SIS or SSIS, and that is their ETL component. So what we're saying here is we want to install all three of these features. Now, you can choose all of your directories, and you notice right here that they're broken up into sections, so you could quickly get to one if you wanted to. You have to have an action install. That's the action that we're going to take this time. This one, I love this parameter. I always have. I accept SQL Server license terms. I love that almost run-on sentence type of parameter, because I could have just said license terms or a license, but they had to put I accept SQL Server license terms. That just makes me laugh every time. Okay, so update source. And this is a really good one, because if you have different service packs or different cumulative updates, or CUs as we call them, then you can actually have those folded in to your main install at the time, and you don't have to worry about installing SQL and then patching it later. You can have it patched at the same time that you're installing it to the exact service pack level that you want. So that's a really nice feature. Now, this is why I don't like the command line install. There are two main reasons. Number one, because the command line is just a run-on sentence. It's like any other DOS command line. It's just a call to an exe and then just a series of parameters that are just endless. I've got word wrap turned on here. Where is it? Here. If I turn it off, every one of these will be on the same line, and it'll just go on forever, right? Let's put word wrap back on. But that's the problem with these command line installs. In order to find anything, you've got to search through an endless sea of parameter values. So let's just take a look at what this would look like. This is just a very simple command line that I pulled off of the internet. So by the way, don't use these two command lines. If you want to do a command line install, don't copy these and think that they're going to work. I have no idea if they're going to work. I pulled these off of forums where people were asking for help with command lines. So these may have errors in them I don't know anything about. I'm just using these to show you the format of the command line install. But I do know that they're both very, very light. So if I were going to copy the install that we did with all of the features that we did in the previous lesson, it would look more like this. It would look something like that. And that's how, look how convoluted that is. And it may even be bigger because we installed a lot of options, right? So this is the first reason I don't like it, because it's just, look at that. That's just, ridiculous to try to find something and make a change without making a big mistake. So it's just really hard to search through. The second reason I don't like these plain command line installs like this is that I have to do all the work. When I start with the command line, I start with setup.exe and absolutely everything else, and so on and so on and so on. I have to start from scratch, and I have to remember every single thing that I want to put in there. And it could take you dozens of installs to get all of the features in there that you want without forgetting something, without having any errors. This is why I just don't like this. So I'm going to close this down. And now we're going to move to a better way to do it. So here we're going to talk about installing with the configuration file. And the config file is where it's at. It really is. Do you remember in the last lesson at the end of the install, I showed you where it created a configuration file? And I said we were going to use that in this lesson? Well, here's where we're going to use it. The configuration file is created every single time you do anything at all in setup. And what it does is it records every single thing that you did, every option that you chose, and it puts it in a config file and an INI for you. So what you can do is you can use that to let SQL build your command line installs for you. You can go through the setup once, and by the time you get to that screen where it gives you the configuration file, you don't have to click install. You can just click cancel. It's already built the config file at that point. So all you do is go through the wizard and it writes those choices to the file as you go. And then you hit cancel at the end so you don't run the install. And now you have a config file with all of the choices that you made. And you can make them in the GUI instead of having to make them at the command line like we did just a minute ago. So now let's go take a look at the config file install. So here we are back in our VM, and I've pulled the configuration file, or the config file that setup created for me, and I renamed it to config file raw. And now I have the new version of the config file. So let's go ahead and take a look at the raw version and see what it gives us. You can automatically see that the format is much better than the command line because every option is on a single line, and they've even got comments in here on things that you can do, on options that you can, the options you can choose. So automatically this is a lot better off. So here we have quiet mode is false. We have simple quiet is false. This is just the default, right? We have UI mode as normal, so that it's going to bring up the UI and we're going to have to make some choices. But here we have the features. These are all of the features that we chose last time. And here, even from BOL, you can see here's IS, sorry, it does the whole line. Here's IS, here's RS, right? Here's full text, here's replication, here's SQL engine. So all of the choices we made to install are here, including our install shared directories, including the distributed replay name, the controller name, and of course the paths to the working directories for the controller. But there are some things that the setup doesn't put in the config file. And of course, those things are, I accept SQL Server license terms. It does not put that in there. And it doesn't put any passwords in there. So think about it from Microsoft's standpoint. They want you to accept the license terms, but of course, they also want you to know what the license terms are. So they can't just default to having you accept it, because if they did, then you can say, hey, I didn't even know that existed. And from the password standpoint, that's just good practice, right? This config file is in clear text, And quite often, people don't go in and clean up the log directories and make sure that all of this stuff is gone. So if they were to script the passwords, like the SA password or your service account passwords, anybody that has access to that directory can go in there and see your passwords, and you may not even know about it, right? So it's really better for everybody concerned if Microsoft doesn't put the passwords in the config file. Now let me go show you the new one that I created. It's not much different. I put the I accept SQL Server license terms equals true. I added indicate progress equals true. And we've got quiet mode equals true. And that's all I've added. Because remember, we accepted the default user accounts that SQL Server setup gave us. So I don't have to specify any user accounts or passwords. But if you did want to use domain accounts or local Windows accounts, then you could put those right up here at the top. That's one thing that I really like to do, is take anything that I need to change and put it up at the top, because the config file isn't dependent on the order that the options are found in. It just searches the config file for the option. So I could put indicate license term, or I accept SQL Server license terms. I could put that all the way down at the bottom, or I could put it over here. It just doesn't matter where it is. So you can order this in the order that you want it, in the order that you want to see it, and you can put tons of your own comments in here. But the thing is that SQL does most of this for you. There's only a little bit of tweaking you need to do to it, whereas in the command line install, you have to do everything, right? So now that we have our config file, and again, the only changes I made from the default one was I added these two, and I changed quiet to true. And that's all I did. So now let's open up setup and learn how to use the config file. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to say open. I'm going to say setup, run as administrator. Okay, now I have my setup window open again. And planning, we're still done with. Installation, new SQL Server standalone installation, or add features to an existing install. Now that's what we chose last time, and you remember there wasn't anywhere to specify a config file, and I don't see any place down here to specify a config file. What you have to do is go to Advanced, and then it's the first choice, Install based on a config file. You go to the location of the file. Now this can be a network location too, right? You can store all of your config files out on the location, out on a network location, and you never have to copy them down. So now I'm going to say config file. Now, I'm not going to run this right now because it will kick off setup instantly. All I have to do is double click on that config file, or click it and say open, and setup kicks off instantly, and there's nothing left for me to do. And because I have quiet, well, I'm not going to show you because I showed you a second ago, but because I have quiet mode turned on, now that I'm in since I'm launching it from the wizard, this is going to be a completely quiet, completely unattended install that's going to run in the background. So you won't see any windows flashing, you won't see any screens go by, you won't see any indication that anything's happening whatsoever. All it'll do is go away and just sit there and look like the computer's doing nothing, and an hour later you'll have SQL installed. So I personally don't like that, because I like to check in on it every now and then, because if something fails just a couple minutes in, you won't know that for another hour, right? Until you go check on it and see what's wrong. But if I'm sitting here watching it for a minute, or if I'm letting it run in the background and kind of watching it out of the corner of my eye, and I'm doing and I'm writing an email, and I look over there and I see that the install stopped just 30 seconds in, I know that there's something that requires my attention, instead of having to check in on it an hour later. So for that reason, I just don't do it this way. Now I'm going to hit cancel because we've got other stuff to talk about. Now that's only one way to kick off the configuration file, right? In the next section, we're going to talk about how to combine the command line and the config file methods to give you, let's go ahead and call it the ultimate setup experience. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, combining command line and config file installs. This is where you're going to get to see how cool this is. So there's really nothing wrong with launching a config file install from the GUI like I just showed you, but it's not very rich. It's better than doing it manually, and it's a lot better than doing it from the command line by specifying all your own options. but it just isn't rich. You can't go any further launching the config file from the GUI than just that. If it's in the config file, those are the options you chose, and if it's not, then that's it. You can't make any decisions. You can't have anything done automatically. So now let's go ahead and get into how you can make the setup experience really, really rich, and like I promised you at the beginning, a one-click solution. Okay, here we are back in the VM. So now we're going to install SQL from the command line using the config file, and then we're just going to kind of build from there. So let's start by bringing up PowerShell. Let's run it as admin. There we go. And if you remember, we had, let's just take a look at it. Yeah, so we have the setup on the D drive. So what you want to do is call d:/setup, and then something like that. Let's make sure that we got that right. There we go. And configuration file.ini. Good. So if I were to run this is the same thing as starting it through the GUI that we did in the last section, except now I've just got it at the command line. Only this time what I have is, since I've got the command line open, since I've got a command window open, it's not going to shut that window down and run it in the background. It's going to show me the progress as it goes along in the command line. So you can actually see the text moving across the screen. You'll see what I mean when we start it up. I'm not going to start it up yet, because while this is good, it's not great. So now we need to build an install script, right? And once we build that install script, we don't have to worry about forgetting anything in the future. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to create a new doc. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I have to put that in a folder. So we'll go with install. I'm going to create a new text document, and I'm going to call it, let's call it install.ps1. We'll make it a PowerShell script. So now I'll open that up. Okay, what are we going to put in our script? Well, the most logical place to start seems to be with our setup line. So let's highlight this, hit enter to select it, come here, come a couple lines down, and we'll just paste that in there. Now, if we didn't go any further, I'm going to go ahead and save that. If we didn't go any further, we would be just fine. But there are things that we need to do to make this a real complete solution. And one of them is to put the directories in there. That's one thing that's not apparent right away when you're going through the config file, is that if you just take the values in the config file as they're given to you and don't make any changes whatsoever, then your setup will actually error out. Let me show you why. Let's come back to the config file, and I'll use my version because I didn't change that. And let's go down here and let's find these directories. Let's see, where are we? Here we are. These two directories right here, the result directory and the working directory. It's very subtle wording in BOL, but these have to exist already. The setup routine, when you do the GUI install, creates these directories for you. But when you do a command line install, you have to do it yourself. So it makes sense that we have to create these directories ourselves. So let's go ahead and put that in our install right above, since we know we have to have them created already. So I'm going to say make directory. There, I'm going to save it. I'm compulsive about saving. And then let's get the other one. Ah, there it is. The working directory. I'll take this. I'll put this in my install. My directory. There we go. So I got the result directory and the working directory, and I'm going to save that. Now, if you just had a regular, if you wanted to change these, if this were something that you wanted to be different on every single box, then you could move these to the top of the config file to remember to change them every time if you didn't want to script this. But since we're going to script it, then the smarter thing to do is to put them in here, and then you can just change them in here if you need to. But it's really not a good idea to do that. You really want everything to be in the same place as much as possible. And that's the kind of thing that you'll coordinate with your Windows guys and your disk guys. When you get a request for a new SQL Server box, you'll tell your Windows guys and your SAN guys, I need these LUNs, I need them to be these size, I need them to be, this drive letter or this mount point. and you'll have the same ones for every single one. So if you're going to put a distributed replay client on every single box, or if you're going to put a specialized location for TempDB on every box, then you'll have the same LUNs set up for every box. And it's really a much better way to manage your SQL Server environment, because the more things change, the more they stay the same. If you have the same LUN for TempDB or for your backup directory on every single server, then you automatically can answer certain questions without even thinking. And you get these questions all the time. People say, hey, where are my backups going? Or hey, what drive is TempDB on? You automatically know the answers to these questions because they're the same across the board. So anyway, all that is to say that we're going to hard code these directories in here because we want them to be the same on all of our installs. And it may not be C, but in this case it will be because it's the only drive I have. Let's make a couple more lines. Now, if you'll remember, there's also one more thing we have to do. We also have to take care of our setup prereq of installing .NET 3.5.1. And you remember how we installed the .NET framework. We used PowerShell for that, right? So we're already in PowerShell. This is where, in the last lesson, I told you that that was going to be a much better, a much richer way to install the framework than going through the GUI. And now that's actually going to pay off. So let's go ahead and add that to it now. Add Windows feature, ASNet framework. Okay, we've got that portion taken care of. I'm going to Control S on that. So we've got one more thing to do for our basic install. Okay, two more things. The first thing is, remember when we added the framework, we had to install the Windows modules. So the first thing we did was we went to Windows PowerShell modules, either here if you've already gone there, or under Admin Tools. Where is it? There we go. Under Admin Tools right there. But we also went to it directly from here, from the command prompt, where we installed the server manager, right? So we're going to do that here. So we have to import module, server manager. I'm going to Control S on that. Now we more or less have a complete install script right now. So we can go ahead and kick this install off. In fact, let's do that. Let's switch back to the command line. And let's kick off this install. We're going to get rid of this, I hope. Here we go. Okay. And now we just need to call this PowerShell script that we started up. Let me save that one last time just to make sure. And now let's get the path. So it's in C, SQL install, and it's called install.ps1. So from here, we just need to say C:\\. Install/. Now when we hit go, it should work just fine. Ah, yes. Okay, so I'm glad this came up because PowerShell doesn't run scripts by default. When you install a fresh version of Windows like we have here, unless you go do something about it, you can't run PowerShell scripts. So we do have one other step that we actually can't script, and that's turning on scripts. And it's really easy to do. We just have to set the execution policy. And let's set it to remote signed. Tell it yes. Now we can run our setup like that. As a matter of fact, let me do that. Let me clear the screen and run it like that so that you can see it without it being cluttered. Okay, I know what the problem is. And you're going to run into this too, so I'm going to leave this in the video. The problem is that by default, Windows hides known file extensions. So if you hit Alt-F inside the folder and then go to Tools and then Folder Options, we'll go to View. Right down here it says Hide Extensions for Known File Types. Uncheck that, and you can see here that it's actually install ps1.txt. Let's take that txt off of there. Now, setting the execution policy was also a deal. So we would have had to do that anyway. It just so happens that we had this extra step involved as well. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen again for you to get it uncluttered. And hit enter. There we go. Now you can see it's collecting data in order to install the .NET framework. then you're going to see the directories being created, and then you're going to see the SQL setup start. Okay, and here are the directories. You can see this directory was created, then the result directory, then the working directory was created, and now you can see the SQL setup kicking off. See? You can see it kicking off right here. Okay, and look at this. We have an error. It says setting configuration file is not recognized, but that's not really what it says. It says the setting configuration, not configuration. Now, I did this on purpose to prove a point. The command line install that we started this section with, you would have this type of error again and again and again and again and again and again if you use just the regular command line install with the command line switches. This is why I don't like this very much. If you were sharp, you caught that when I typed it into the script. So let's get past that. It's going to fail. See, and now it's writing to the summary log. Now we have to come back here and say configuration file. There we go. So now the setup will run, but all of these other things are already here. The .NET framework is already installed. We don't need the server manager if we're not going to install the framework, and these directories already exist. So the best thing for us to do at this point is to just comment those out. I'll comment these out just this time because you've seen them work. And this is how creating a script is going to be. You're going to have a little bit of trial and error in there, and I Control S to save that. You're going to have a little bit of trial and error in there, so it's best to start this up on a test box somewhere until you get your install script exactly the way you want it, and then you can move it into production. So I'm going to clear the screen again for you, and let's try this again. And here's the same error again. I wonder if I just didn't save that file. Let's hit Control S and save that file. Clear screen again. And it tells us those paths already existed. That's fine. And here we have the error again. Now if you notice that the error hasn't changed. We still have the configuration file, even though I went back and saved it again, right? So these are the kinds of problems you can run into when you script, and the solution here is easy. Here's what happened. When I got that initial error in here because it said install.ps1.txt, and I came in here and said Alt-F and Tools, and I changed it in the folder options right here to uncheck hide extensions for known extension types, it did that. I changed the file to install.ps1 instead of install.ps1.txt, but I already had install.ps1.txt open. So these changes I've made to it were saved. When I hit Control S, it resaved it as .ps1.txt instead of .ps1. So what I needed to do instead of that was to close this and open up just the plain ps1 file, which you can see doesn't have any of our changes in it. So I need to put the R there, and then I need to come back up here and comment these guys back out again. Just like that. So you notice we were seeing some signs, some telltale signs that something was wrong, right? It kept giving us the same error message. It wasn't respecting our comment when we commented out these make directories. It said that the directories already existed. So you can see we had, there was something wrong there. And when we see install.ps1.txt up here at the top, and then we come in here and we can see that that has been recreated. In fact, let's delete that. And we can see that it had been recreated. Then I knew instantly what was wrong. I should have closed that file to begin with. And again, I love for you guys to see stuff like this because it just shows you the kinds of problems you can have when you script. So while it's a lot more touchy, right, than the GUI is, there are a lot more rewards. So every single script building session is like this. You try something, you make a mistake, you fix it. You try something, you get it slightly wrong, you fix it, and you keep going on and on and on until you get the exact setup experience you want. It's not that hard. You can see it can just be touchy. So let's clear the screen again, and let's see if we actually get what we're looking for this time. There we go. Now SQL setup is just rolling along. And this is what you're going to see. When it finishes, the screen will go away. It won't stop moving. It should just go away. So now that that's running on its own, let me show you something else we can do. There's one more thing we need to take care of, or we may need to take care of from the config file. We come down here. I'm going to run a search on this instead. I'm going to search for the box name. There it is. You remember this distributed controller name that I like to give the name of dist replay and then the box name. Now that's something else that you can easily move to the top of your config file and just change it every time, or you can pass it in as a parameter of your command line every time. So let's see what that would look like. We've got dist replay icon. Let me just Control C on that to copy it. Let me come back into SQL install here, and I'm going to go into my install script, and we've got this right here. Now I can just specify that right there. Now there's a precedence that goes on here, okay? Anything that you specify in the config file will be overridden by anything you specify in the command line. So if I had both of these, if I had this in here and in the config file, this one would take precedence. So if I wanted to put the distributed replay controller on every single box, I have to give it a unique name, and something like dist replay followed by the server name is a really good naming convention as far as I'm concerned, because you can always guess what it's going to be if you want to connect to a certain box. So you can count on either changing this every single time, changing the box name right here every single time you run an install, or you can take advantage of the power of PowerShell and have it do that for you. Let's go ahead and see what I mean. So let's go ahead and start by opening up a different PowerShell window, because we're going to experiment a little bit. And let's see if we can get the computer name. Will that do it? Okay, good. I got the computer name just by doing that. Let's go ahead and set that to a variable. Let's say name. Actually, there's a better way to do that. Up arrow, and then home. Name equals. There. Okay, good. So now I have it in a variable. And again, when we get to the section of the course where we talk about PowerShell, all this will become much clearer. Right now I'm just trying to show you the kind of logic that's possible for your scripted installs. So let's take this exact same thing that we just did and add it to here. Let's bring this down a couple lines. And let's say, let's not give it name, let's give it just replay name. So I'm just going to define that equals the computer name. So I've just set the variable to the local computer name. Now I need to make this dynamic in here, and in PowerShell that's really easy. You don't have to build strings in PowerShell. Now let me just copy this. Double click on that. Highlight it, Control C. Take away the box name and put it right there. So now I'm always going to get the box name, and I'm going to always preface it with dist replay and then the box name, and then that's what's going to go into my controller name every single time. So now I don't even have to worry about that either. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that the scripted installs are so much richer and you can do so much more and make it a one-button solution. You can make all the options, or a lot of the options anyway, fully dynamic, and you can read them from values and you don't ever even have to touch it. And even after here, I can go a couple more lines down and say, when SQL is finished installing, go ahead and run these post-install tasks, like installing the backup routines and making my server setting changes and changing the file growth rates of the model database and stuff like that. So I can take all of that stuff that I would ordinarily have to do manually, and I can add it to the script as well, add these user accounts and give them these permissions and whatnot. So you can do all kinds of things. Now there are some things you won't be able to do. Right? You're not going to be able to, for every single SQL box, you're not going to be able to say, which groups and which users are going to get which permissions, because they're going to be for different applications. So there's no way that you can have everything scripted. But all of the stuff that you need to do, all your check DBs, all your reindexes, all your server level settings that you know that you're going to want standard across the board, any management objects that you want put out there, you can have that stuff scripted in here and you never have to touch it. So I'll tell you what. I'm going to put this back up. Nope, not this one. This one. And I'm going to go ahead and pause until the install is done, and then I'll come back. Okay, and here we are at the end of the install. I thought I remembered it closing the screen, but it doesn't. It just goes back to a command prompt. Now it's time to check if the install actually completed. So the easiest way is to go to Start. See, I already see SQL Server Data Tools right there. Go to Start. Come here to SQL Server 2012. You can see all the stuff up under there. That's one good way. However, the better way is to go to the log file. So we'll go to C, Program Files, SQL Server 110, Setup Bootstrap, and Log. And there's that summary text that we saw in the first lesson, or in the last lesson. You come here, it says passed but reboot required. See Log for details. So we know that it passed. We know that the SQL installed just fine. If it didn't, then there would be an error here that we would be able to see, and it would tell us exactly what failed. But just for one final check, we like to go down here and see passed, 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 passed. We like to see that all the way across the board. Everything passed, so we have a successful install of SQL Server. Let me go ahead and close this down. I'm going to minimize that just in case I need it. We can get rid of this. Now we can get rid of this. Yeah, go ahead and save. We can get rid of this. Now there are just two more things I need to show you here. Let's go back into Setup. Let's right click, say Open, say Run as Admin. Okay, and now we've got the setup again. Now I want to show you how to do an edition upgrade. An edition upgrade is going from like Standard Edition to Enterprise Edition, or from Developer Edition to Enterprise Edition, something like that, right? Now, you can always go up. You can go from Standard to Enterprise, but you can never go from Enterprise to Standard. You can never go down. However, we go to Maintenance, Edition Upgrade. You can see here that it's going to do a rule check again. Here we are. Everything passed. I'm going to say OK. You can see here it does another setup support rule check. Tell it OK. You're going to enter the product key, agree to the license terms, select the instance that you want to upgrade. Of course, we've only got one instance on this box. Edition upgrade rules. They all passed. Now we're ready to upgrade the edition. Now, again, we have our config file that we could go to and have that scripted. If I hit upgrade now, it'll go ahead and upgrade. I'm not going to, because I'm on developer right now and I don't have an enterprise level CD put in the, or DVD put in the drive, so it wouldn't do me any good to run through the upgrade. So I'm gonna click cancel, but it really only takes a very short time. Now, one more thing I want to show you, if I can get this to go over to install, there we go, is to upgrade from an earlier version. You can only upgrade 2 behind, so in this case, SQL 2005. And I think you have to be on SP4 to do it. However, to go through the upgrade process, now I'm not going to get much love here because I'm already on 2012, so there's nothing for me to upgrade from. I've actually never run this on 2012. I don't know where it'll fail. However, it's wizard based again, and of course you've got the config file that it'll create for you at the end, so you can easily script it later on if you want to script different upgrades. However, the only reason I'm showing you this is to get past a certain point where I show you that, where you can see that it's pretty much the same as the regular setup. So the only reason I'm showing you this now is to show you that it's a lot like regular setup, only there are a lot fewer choices you can make. And as a matter of fact, there's almost no choice you can make, because it's going to make you upgrade the features you have. You're not going to be able to add any features like distributed replay client or anything like that until you upgrade the installation. Then you can come back afterwards and add those features, but you can't upgrade, say, a SQL 2005 instance and add any 2012 features at the same time. You have to do an upgrade, then you have to run setup again, and then add those features. So you see, it says here that there are no updates found, so I actually can't go any further. However, if I did, it would just send me through a short series of screens that I basically wouldn't be able to change. Just click next all the way through until you get to the upgrade, and it'll run through its upgrade, and it's really not that long. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. Close out all this. Okay, we are done with setup. You now know how to set up through a GUI, and you know how to set up through all of the versions of the command line. There's a lot more to set up than I showed you here. There are actually different types of setup as well. We never saw a clustered setup or a sysprep setup, and we never saw a lot of the options come into play. But this will get you more than started, and you can explore a lot on your own.